So we're talking about whether life is a dream. We're talking about whether you live in a dream and how you can defend this or support it. And so I made a short video on another platform. We talked about the thinkers that have brought this up in philosophy that have talked about it. I don't know, as a scientist, how far you'd get with this theory. Descartes challenged us by saying, how do we ever know for sure we're not living in a dream? And this is related to his idea of the evil demon who's out to trick us. And I've always thought of that in two different ways, which means kind of more like the dream theory, but also kind of like anyone who runs the show that we're not aware of has a really bad sense of humor. And I call it the Murphy's Law syndrome because of Murphy's Law, obviously. But we're going to talk about these thinkers that have refuted the idea that you live in a dream. The first one is Thomas Reid, my favorite. Thomas Reid is famous for talking about dream life versus awake life and how there's a built-in common sense, inarguable principle that when you wake up, you know it. And so if that's the case, then there's something substantially different about being awake because you don't have that same awareness in sleeping life. He also was famous for talking about lucid dreaming, his own lucid dreaming, and that is that when you have self-awareness in your dream. That means when you're dreaming and you know it. So he was very curious about the whole dream thing, but fit into his common sense system. You can see how waking life is obviously different and fundamental. And so the next thinker is Charles Sanders Peirce. I don't know why you pronounce his last name Peirce because it's spelled like Pierce. My favorite guy, and his argument was that perception puts demands on you when you wake up. So the minute you're awake, you start seeing, hearing, and feeling things uh, perceptibly that are different. They're automatic. They demand of you a kind of um, awakeness, whereas sleeping, they're all over the place. They actually don't even make sense, but they become very linear and you can't change them when you're awake. I like that idea by Peirce. Wittgenstein, of course, talking about private language and talking about language agreements as they relate to all of this kind of skepticism, in particular, the common sense idea that external reality is undeniable. Wittgenstein liked that idea, as G.E. Moore did. And Wittgenstein's point was that language wouldn't work at all if we didn't have general agreements. We have the private language system that has to find agreements with everyone else, which fights against the kind of skepticism that would support denying reality, dream theory, and solipsism. I think solipsism is a big part of this because if you're dreaming and that's everything, then that's also solipsism. You're only one person. And we just talked my whole longer video earlier about how solipsism is impossible. We wouldn't be able to recreate, um, especially while you're awake, all of these consistent people that you meet and all these consistent experiences that you have that come to you day after day in their complete consistent forms. Because if life is a dream or if it was in fact solipsistic, which means you're the only consciousness. All these experiences, and I probably just messed up my mic like an idiot. I probably did that when I was a comedian. All these experiences would be your own. All these people would be made up by you. None of that makes sense, and that is true also for dream theory. And that's Wittgenstein's take on it coming from a language perspective. But my favorite is Ryle, a philosopher I don't talk about a lot, 1900 to 1976. And he proposes an idea that I would have proposed because I'm such a great tall genius. Well, then why didn't I? Ryle's point is that you can't have the idea of a dream state. You can't even think about dreaming without its opposite, without contrasting it with awakeness. So without an original concept called awakeness, dreaming would make no sense. And so we've already formed this concept of what it's like to have lively perception and direct, consistent reciprocation from the world that I think we have to believe in. And if that's the case, it is that idea that we then can use to contrast it with this other state. But that state would have no value if there was no waking life. So that's how people in Western philosophy have responded to life as a dream. I think you'll find something very different if you study Eastern. I don't think the ideas would be that much different because they never are. They just always look more different. Um, I myself, of course, agree with all these people, and it's no surprise that these are the philosophers that I've liked. I've always liked Peirce. I've always liked um, G. Moore for reading Thomas Reed. I've always thought Wittgenstein had value, even though I think he was restrictive and reductive. And Thomas Reed is my main guy. And so it makes sense for me to value external reality and also fight against solipsism. And that would be a direct refutation then of any kind of idea that you might think you have that you live in a dream or the matrix when you don't. So thanks for coming. Thanks for putting up with my big glasses. I don't know why I did that. And I purposely didn't wear a hat. Come back soon. Bring pizza.